Okay, guys. Hey, this is Joe Willis. I'm your MELS 602 clinical coach. You should have received an email from me today, and if you didn't, go back and pull it up and look at it. Based on some feedback that I've got, I felt that it was probably in the best interest of everyone for me to go ahead and give you a little more information on AAPTEL task one. So I want to go ahead and do this video. It's going to be a brief video, just kind of highlight what's required in task one. Make sure you're at a good level of understanding as you proceed through this week and getting ready to do that first draft. I apologize, kind of underestimated the needs of the group. Also, with the gradual release of responsibility, please don't misinterpret what I said. You're going to get just as much support as you always have. And we'll gradually work out of that. But I will go into a little more detail as far as AAPTEL Task 2 goes next week. But when I am kind of on the same Zoom session as a course instructor, I like to be brief and be quick and give them as much time as they need, since they are the host of the Zoom session. So when we kind of branch out on our own, then we'll go ahead and continue to go into more detail. But this is going to be brief. AAPTEL Task 2 next week will be brief, but just contact me if you have any questions. So let's go ahead and get started. So as I said last night, the AAPTEL is really very similar to the AAPTEL. The AAPTEL was, what did you do with the AAPTEL? You did some research, you identified some best practices, you looked at some gaps, and you made an action plan to improve student learning. And the AAPTEL, you're going to do basically the same thing. You're going to do some research, you're going to identify some best practices, you're going to kind of pull in some data to see where your school's at, and then you're going to create an action plan, but not for student learning, but for teacher empowerment and leadership. So I'm in the Scale Handbook, and we're going to scroll down here to the kind of the purpose of the AAPTEL. I'm going to read through this, or kind of I'm reading from or referring to this first paragraph right here. You want to demonstrate yourself as a successful leader by learning how to empower teachers and become effective leaders in their own right and decision makers in the building. This is kind of this evidence will kind of take you through that. And I do want to kind of review the differences in vocabulary and some terminology here. Your evidence is the projects, if you will, that you do each semester. The evidence for MELS 601 was the AAPTEL. The evidence for MELS 602 is the AAPTEL, Analysis and Action Plan for Teacher Empowerment and Leadership. Within those evidences are tasks. Task 1, Task 2, Task 3, and so forth. Those tasks, those subsections, are a piece or a part of the evidence. When we're talking artifacts, your artifacts are what you create based on your activities within the individual tasks that make up the whole evidence. And so your artifacts are kind of focused in on in your competency folio. We'll review all that later. But they can also be used in your narrative as you write each individual task. I think they work better in the appendix. You can refer to them in the narrative and then put them in the appendix. But with all that being said, this is your document. I will make suggestions for revision, but as a whole, it is based on what you feel is professional and works with your particular leadership style. So let's get back to the paragraph here. So in the AAPTEL, what you're going to do is you're going to basically do some research. Based on that research for best practices in teacher empowerment and leadership, you're going to kind of create a checklist to determine if those best practices exist in your particular school, environment, site. And then once you did, you're going to identify some gaps between what research says is the best practice for empowerment and leadership, what you found out at your school, and then you're going to develop a growth plan for the school. And then you're going to present that plan to the leadership team. So basically, as I said before, very similar to the AAPTEL, do some research, find out what the best practices are based on that research, kind of collect some data using a tool and instrument to collect that data that you created, and then identify some gaps and some needs and come up with a plan and present that plan to the leadership. So that's basically what this small paragraph says. So let's jump down to the rubric for task 1. Okay, if you'll notice in the description, it tells you that you're going to create or do a literature review. That's when we've been saying research, that's what we mean, a literature review with an accompanying bibliography on these various areas of empowerment and leadership best practices. And those areas are building efficacy and empowerment among staff, results-oriented professional development, recruitment, placement, and mentoring of staff, approaches for evaluation of school staff, teacher leadership, and decision making. So right there, that's going to be your headings of your narrative. Now you're going to have, you're going to have your title page. You're going to do your give your site or school profile, and then you're going to go into these different headings. And what you're doing is you're researching in the literature what the experts are saying about these different categories of these different areas. Now, the heading doesn't have to be verbatim. You can shorten it, like efficacy and empowerment, or results-oriented professional development, or professional development, and so on and so forth. You can call that heading really whatever you wish it to be, but each heading needs to deal with these areas. So you get into the literature, you look at Marizana, you look at Todd Whitaker, even DeFore has some things to say about these areas. You pull that information out, and with each of these areas, you need to have 3 sources. Same as when you were doing research on PLCs for AAPTEL, each of these areas you need to look at 3 sources, 3 different types of literature out there, recognized experts, recognized literature for each of these areas. And you do research on what are the best practices. Once you've done that research, then you create a checklist. And a checklist, survey, some type of research tool or research instrument that is going to help you gauge where your school is in relation to each of these areas. So we go under proficient, go under proficient. You have consistently aligned the literature review with the areas of best practices, and then your checklist, your research instrument, your survey. It can be a combination of that, what we would call a mixed methods research type tool, is designed by you to gauge where your school is in these areas. If research says this is what needs to be going on, if a school is actively involved in teacher empowerment, the teachers feel empowered, they feel empowered to make decisions, to be a leader in the school. If this is what's going on in the school that is using those best practices, then I should be able to see some sign of that, some evidence of that within my school. And if I don't, then that could be an identified need that needs to be addressed. So that's what that checklist, that's what the instructional rounds comes to mind when I talk about that. That's what what they're used for is you go around and collect data. It can be quantitative, qualitative data about where you're at in relation to the best practices that you've researched. And that's task 1. That's basically task 1. And that's what you would talk about in your narrative. Now I'm going to pull up another document. Let me go to share here. I need to share another document. All right. Okay, you should be seeing a Microsoft Word document that's entitled AAPTEL Helpful Hints. I'll show you where this is located later, but this is some helpful hints for you as you go through the AAPTEL. And it's kind of what I've already talked about. The AAPTEL is the second of the 6 evidences. The APSEL was evidence 1. The AAPTEL is evidence 2. You follow the same format as you did completing the APSEL. There is a title page. Actually, you can use the title page that you used for evidence 1. You just make a few changes. And that's how part of the why this program gets a little more easier as far as the process. You can recycle, reuse some things you've already created. In this instance, the title page that you created for the APSEL, you can pull out, make a few changes, change the title to evidence 2 or the APTEL, put your name there, and you can reuse that. Also, the school profile that you created for evidence 1, you can use in evidence 2. Remember, the reader, whoever's reading this document, may change from semester to semester. They may not be familiar with your school. As we go through the program, I will have read that school profile several times. I'll be familiar with your school, but I want you to think of each semester somebody new is going to be reading your document. So therefore, you need to give them the background of the setting. You need to share with them that school profile, so they will have an understanding of where you're coming from and what the culture is of the school. So, but you know, it shouldn't be anything new. You might not have to tweak it from time to time, depending upon the evidence that you're going to be working with, but you should be able to use it in part each time, if not in whole. So you just pull the school profile that you use for the APSEL can be used again for the evidence, and that you're reusing that and recycling it. You don't have to recreate that. We go back to, as far as this helpful hints document goes, task 1, prompt 1. This is what I told you. Your evidence in the evidence of task 1, these could be your headings. Please remember that it's a minimum of 3 sources that you're going to use. You use APA. I don't know, can't remember who I've told what in each cohort, but remember you will be using APA edition 6. If you hear out there that some people are using edition 7, those are the new students coming into the program. To kind of be consistent and not create a lot of confusion, we determined that your cohort would be best served by continuing to use APA edition 6. So make sure that you do that. Here's each of the headings like we discussed from the rubric. It talks about the 3 sources here. For each of the headings. I did talk about some of the people you can include: Todd Whitaker, Darlin Hammond, Marzano. Those are some of the sources that you can pull from within this teacher empowerment and leadership. And once again, here's just a kind of another reminder to use the correct APA. The correct APA for you would be the 6th edition. Now, as you do some research, you're going to see, I think Marzano's got something out there. Todd Whitaker's got something out there. A checklist of kind of what you're going to be looking for. You can draw from those. You can use those, just give proper citation, but it's one that you created. So in other words, look at what's out there, and then use what's out there to create the one that fits your school. And kind of addresses what you want to address at your school. So you are creating one. If you use some instructional rounds, checklist from Marzano or Whitaker, then make sure that you give reference to it, that you utilize some of that research, some of that literature to create your own. Now this helpful hints document is not only giving you helpful hints about task 1, but also about task 2 and each task throughout the AAPTEL. So it's a good document for you to use. I'm still going to go over it, and maybe not this document, but go over the task of each AAPTEL in a little more detail, more along the lines of what I'm doing tonight. But you can certainly use this as a resource. Now, where would you find this? Let me share another screen with you. And here you should be seeing my laptop screen. I'm going to go into my internship shell. Being candidates already enrolled in the program, you should still have access to my internship shell. If you can't find it, or you can't pull it up, let me know. I think I told this cohort that it may be down because they're populating the new students, the 601 students, into my internship shell over the next week or so. So it may be down for a period of time. Just check back. If you try a couple of days or 3 days in a row and you can't get in, or you can't see it, please let me know. But in my internship shell, you will find that AAPTEL helpful hints in the same place that you found the APSL helpful hints, and that will be in templates and resources, and that is on the sidebar right here. And this is where you will find the AAPTEL the evidence template, and also the helpful hints. And also, for those of you who are using APA 6th edition, and here's once again another reminder, we did build some redundancy into this, so you'll be supported. MELS 602 through 605 candidates will still continue to use the APA 6th edition. MELS 601 students and anybody coming after this cohort of 601 will be using the 7th edition. So here's some resources for you for the 6th edition APA. And I think I kind of talked about this with your cohort. I think Dr. Neal and Dr. Burgess mentioned it too. Well, there you go. I want to do a brief video to give you some more support on the AAPTEL Task 1, and then kind of let you know and make sure that you knew where the template and the helpful hints resource was. If you got any questions, let me know. I hope this helps, and I guess we will talk to you next week. You have a great evening. I hope and pray you and your family stay safe and healthy. Thank you.